Let's begin in the United States. I've followed Donald Trump's tweets for a long time, and they are frequently unhinged, green ink, capital letter. But this week, when he called for people to liberate one city after another, one state after another in his own country, of which he's the president, I thought that it was quite likely that I'd hear the flap of white coats as they came to take him away. I sense from watching his daily press conferences that he is rapidly losing touch with reality. You may say he's never been there, but I always thought there was method in his madness. And I think I was right about that. I don't resile from that. But when you are encouraging armed people onto the streets of your own country, I think that country is in very serious trouble indeed. And I think the United States is in very serious trouble indeed. It is now, within a week, it will have a larger percentage of people unemployed than it had at the height of the Great Depression in the 1930s. There is going to be a terrible economic hurricane in the United States in the run-up to the presidential election. In ordinary circumstances, that would mean that Donald Trump was for the high jump. That would mean he actually needn't even bother turning up in November for the presidential election. The economy ruined, unbelievable levels of sickness and death in the communities across the United States. And I mean communities. These are not just numbers. These are cities. These are blocks. Brooklyn, thousands of people afflicted. The Navajo people, the indigenous American people of the Navajo, have actually become close to fearing that they will be wiped out by the coronavirus, those of them that weren't wiped out when the white settlers came and stole their land and killed them in the first place. The Navajo are amongst the most affected people on the entire earth. But Donald Trump, throwing accusations around like Billy O, doesn't seem fazed. Why? Well, one reason has to be that the mental decline, I used to call it cognitive decline, but I was just being polite. The mental degeneration, rapid mental decline of the Democratic Party's candidate, Joe Biden, must be of grave concern to anyone in his family, in his party, in his country. This man simply will not be able to stand a general election campaign against a ruffian like Donald Trump. Donald Trump will not be polite. He will not even play with Joe Biden as the cat plays with the mouse as a prelude to killing it. Donald Trump will tear Joe Biden apart. And therefore, we have the likelihood, in my opinion, I haven't seen the bookmakers' odds lately, but the likelihood of a man who has lost almost all connection to reality, with his finger on the nuclear button in the United States for another 4.5 years. That is truly terrifying to me. And I think it ought to be to you. Let's talk about China. The United States government has decided that as a prophylactic to its own staggering levels of inaction, ineptitude, its staggering levels of incompetence, has decided to go all out to blame China, even though their own chief medical officer continues to contradict the president when he, in an increasingly bizarre way, accuses China of having let this whole monster loose from a laboratory in Wuhan. Now, I said right at the beginning of this crisis that the coronavirus could have escaped from a germ warfare lab. It could have escaped from the Chinese germ warfare lab in Wuhan. It could have escaped from Fort Detrick in the United States germ warfare lab. It could have been taken by the United States military based right next to the Fort Detrick germ warfare laboratory to Wuhan last December for the military games which took place there. It could be either of those things. But all of the science accumulated to date makes clear that actually the coronavirus is a naturally occurring virus, a mutation of a naturally occurred virus that has already visited us in times gone by, a mutation that makes it still more deadly than it has ever been. The French government today denounced Donald Trump's warmongering by saying there was no evidence whatsoever that this virus came from the germ warfare laboratory in Wuhan. If anyone's got any evidence to the contrary, let them produce it. But of course, they haven't, they won't, they can't, because so far, at least, it doesn't exist. It's simply this. Don't look at us in all our staggering negligence and incompetence. Look over there. Look at China. And of course, where Washington goes, the United Kingdom follows. This week, the British government announced a deep dive, that was a new one on me, a deep dive inquiry into Britain's relations with China, and it will never, they said, be business as usual again. Well, personally, I hope the Chinese heard that loud and clear. I hope they concluded that these people are not your friends. These people are not even reliable business partners. And according to the right-wing press this weekend, the former decision to continue with Huawei in the 5G rollout is going to be visited again and terminated. Look, I hold no candle for China. I fly no flags for them. I hardly know a single Chinese person. I haven't been in China for decades. I'm not here speaking for China. But it seems to me obvious that one of the countries that has handled this outbreak of a naturally occurring virus best is China. China and New Zealand and South Korea and even Ireland have handled this virus almost infinitely better than the United States and Great Britain have handled it. And therefore I conclude that the British and American governments, in order to try and divert attention from their own failures, their own criminal negligence, a point to which I shall return, are seeking to get up and running a scare campaign, a hate campaign against China. And I hope that China draws the lesson from this. As a matter of fact, be careful what you wish for, because if the Chinese withdrew their investments from the United States and Britain, if the Chinese sold the treasury bonds that they hold for the United States, if the Chinese dumped the dollar, well, we'd all go under pretty damn quick. So be careful what you wish for. That's all I'm saying. But today's Sunday Times and today's Sky News reportage of this crisis makes another thing abundantly clear, and that is that Boris Johnson has lost the confidence of Rupert Murdoch, and that is a dangerous place for any politician to be. There's all-out war now against Boris Johnson by his erstwhile closest allies. And it's not hard to see that the man that Rupert has anointed to take Boris Johnson's place is little Michael Gove. who is, well, how shall I put it? Pretty close. His lips sucking on the posterior of Rupert Murdoch, and for a very long time. How do I know this? I follow the public prints and the pronouncements of politicians and senior media people very closely. When I hear Robert Peston of ITV claim that he's gobsmacked to find how incompetent Boris Johnson has turned out to be, I say, well, he's the very man that you did so much to put into office. And if you're gobsmacked now, it's because you've been encouraged to be gobsmacked for an ulterior purpose, an ulterior motive. When I see the journalists who did so much to elect Boris Johnson's government now turning on him with venom, he's missed. Skipped is the word they use, not missed. He didn't miss 5 Cobra meetings. That's the underground Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. Sounds more impressive if you say Cobra. The Cobra meetings, where the British state's inner sanctum meets to handle emergencies, were not missed by Boris Johnson, but skipped by Boris Johnson 5 times. It's abundantly clear from the reportage, particularly in the Sunday Times today, that the government knew that 500,000 people in Britain were likely to die from the coronavirus and did absolutely nothing about it. They did nothing about buying the personal protection equipment, our frontline services, and then our secondary services, like bus drivers and tube staffs and so on, would have the necessary PPE. They did nothing to secure the number of ventilators that we would need. They did nothing for months, it's now clear, to prepare a response to an emergency which they themselves had concluded during a drill for this in 2016 would quickly overwhelm the National Health Service. Operation Cygnus, 2016, October, war-gamed an invasion by a flu-like virus coming from East Asia. And they concluded that they could not publish the results of the war game because it was, and I quote, truly terrifying. Some people said it was a threat to, quote, national security to release the results of that Operation Cygnus. So they knew from 2016, when incidentally Jeremy Hunt, who is now scuttling around the TV studios, obliquely blaming his successors for their failures, Jeremy Hunt was the Health Secretary at the time. But never mind Cygnus. We knew from January that this was coming our way, and our government not only did nothing to save us, they deliberately did nothing. Because it's now as plain as a pikestaff. Their policy was herd immunity. Their purpose was for us all to get it and let the devil take the weak and the old, many of whom had voted for Boris Johnson just last December to put him in power in the first place. It's quite clear that the death toll in Britain is going to be the highest in all of Europe. It might even be the case that the British death toll is second highest in the whole world, with the United States as the highest. Now, if that fills you with confidence in the 2 blonde bombshells in power in Washington and London, well, good luck to you in Ward 5 in Broadmoor. But for the rest of us, we have to conclude that our governments, our states, Our societies are not fit for the purpose of defending our people against our real enemies, are not fit for the purpose of providing work and food and shelter for our own people. We are led by dangerous fools, dangerous knaves. That's really the question you have to work out.